One. All right, guys, we are here. It is late and we are
very late
podcasting. We're going to do the first half of our podcast tonight, get that whipped out, and then we're going to do another one tomorrow. So we're kind of split it up amongst 2 days, which is going to be kind of fun.
It's going to be real fun. I agree with that statement.
We are going to do a quick test.
Quick test. Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
7, 8, 9, 10.
9, 10. Be aware that I do have my connection to my computer running right now. So if the video is bad, that's why.
It's the best it's ever sounded.
That sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I see what's wrong with it now.
Yep. All right. I'm going to go ahead and switch back real fast just so that we have a cut point for when we're editing.
Perfect.
Or an easy cut point to recognize. So we will be right back. See you in a Hey everyone, welcome to ThetaWave podcast. My name is Ryan Reed. I am one of your hosts. I am a machine learning engineer, a neuroscience researcher, as well as musician, songwriter. I'm here with my co-host, Jacob Holland, who is also a neuroscience researcher. And today we are going to be doing things a little bit differently.
A little bit.
We are going to first off, we have one change that where we are actually going to be releasing our videos split up amongst the first half. Generally speaking, is going to be the time where we go over our topics, and that's actually going to be a separate video in the edited versions and kind of its own thing. And then in the live podcast, we move on to a kind of free flowing section where we just talk about anything, and we're going to release that as a separate video as well. So probably eventually what we'll end up doing is letting people who support us watch the live combined versions, earlier in the week when they're released, and then kind of spreading out our release of the others later on.
Yep.
But tomorrow we're actually kind of doing it in reverse this time around, just because of where we're at the moment. But we're going to be doing the creative, like free flow section now, and we're going to be doing the rest tomorrow. And tomorrow we are going to be talking about, I think we're going to be talking about the auditory system.
That's right.
For our neuroscience topic. And then we are going to be talking, I think, about activation functions for our machine learning topic. And then have we decided on a nootropic topic yet or not? Okay.
I think we have.
Well, it'll be a surprise, whatever we do.
We'll discuss that tonight. There's a lot of interesting nootropics out there. Much to discuss and much to learn for both of us and for you guys. So stay tuned and listen. Just because we're doing a free flow, a little more creative podcast right now, doesn't mean that it's just as informative. We're going to be going over some pretty interesting topics as well. Because both of us really like to get nitty gritty and into the details about anything, whether it's abstract concepts or very fundamental principles of nature.
And sometimes it's stuff that we're well versed in. Sometimes it's just stuff that fascinates us. It really ranges.
So if there are any physicists in the chat, please tell us if we say anything wrong. Okay.
Yes. Just because we will usually, if we know something and we're pretty either an expert on the topic or pretty familiar with it, then we will present it in that way. And if we're not familiar, then we'll make sure that we kind of couch things in that safety area of I'm not sure, like 100% sure on this kind of thing. But yeah, also be aware that we're running into a little hiccup today where we don't actually have access to our remote control dashboard, meaning that we can't actually control our cameras from here. And so there may be less camera switching going on since I'm not able to do that via my phone.
But a plus side is that our audio is the best it's ever been so far. So that's a plus,
Yes.
We've kind of, we're balancing the scales here a little bit.
We're figuring things out. We're getting a little more refinement done, and hopefully someday we will be able to have a podcast that is glitch free.
One day, soon we'll even be in a new location, probably in the next month or two, and that should be a much better experience.
Dude,
overall.
I'm all about like hardwaring things into like when it comes to complex like streams and whatnot. The more stuff I can cut out of the possibilities, as far as what's going wrong, the better.
Definitely. So we can only add positive things to the system. Very nice.
So you mentioned that one of the things that you were curious about, or that you'd been kind of mulling over and wanted to talk about, was the nature of intelligence.
Yes.
Explain a little more about that.
I wanted to talk to you about that, especially from your perspective as a machine learning expert, how we view models as intelligent, what it means for them to be intelligent versus maybe more contemporary humanistic styles of intelligence that are very energy efficient, very adaptable, as opposed to very complex computations that use lots of energy, and how we're able to oftentimes supersede these very complicated models with such a well-structured nervous system that we have. And I guess I just wanted to get your perspective on that, and maybe the direction that AI is going, and if the current direction of more energy, more complexity, more data being fueled into these large language models will give rise to something that could be equivalent to something like artificial general intelligence, or if we need to go in a complete different direction, a new emerging field, maybe in machine learning, that's going to come out. And so I guess I just want your perspective on that.
Well, there's a little bit of an issue with even discussing that because of the fact that for most of humanity, like, we don't know exactly how we define our terms. And so we have this vague concept of sentience, and we have this vague concept of what qualifies as consciousness. And yet people are trying to say that they're worried about like an AI developing consciousness. And yet those things haven't even yet been really clearly defined. And so when we had this conversation on one of our other podcasts about like the kind of consciousness and what that means and how that applies to things like other animals or AIs and things like that. So there's that component to it. And I'm not sure if that's part of what you're asking about, or whether you're primarily just asking about just the intelligence component of AI. Like, what are you asking there quite about? Does it include consciousness, or is it separate from consciousness?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question. How do you distinguish consciousness from intelligence? Because oftentimes we associate consciousness with the ability to self-reflect, and more self-referential processing. And some people would actually explain consciousness as something more different, more as a fundamental awareness that organic life can have based off of certain principles that underlie its functions. So something like integrated information theory would say because of the causal powers of the integrated information as a system as a whole that organic life has, there is a certain amount of consciousness that can be associated with it, even something as simple as a bacteria. But that would not necessarily mean that it has high levels of intelligence. And so I guess when it comes to intelligence, I wonder how would an AI mimic human intelligence as opposed to something like an actual organic system that might work fundamentally different, but still have that similarity in intelligence past a certain point of complexity that it has. And even if there is no consciousness in AI, that personally doesn't necessarily matter to me. It's more so about that intelligence aspect.
We're pretty much, in my opinion, we're pretty much at our peak ability to mimic human style intelligence without rethinking the way that we're going about it. Because, and there's a couple different components there. One, kind of like you mentioned, is there's a self-referential processing component to what makes us us that helps us choose how to refine our own processing and our own, what type of processing is better suited for our life and is going to help us more. For me, for example, what gives me personality, a lot of what gives me personality is not only kind of the values that I hold, but also the what my self-referential processing has resulted in, which is a high value in reason and logical emotional processing and things like that. And so they've tuned my networks like based off of, that self-referential processing of my place in life and my experiences and whatnot. And that's leads to the other key difference there, which is that large language models are always going to have a certain amount of artificiality to them because of the way that our we approach these tasks, because we're trying to make them as tactfully utilitarian as possible. What we do is we train them on massive amounts of and widespread data. And so they are getting a conglomerate view of humanity and our opinions on things rather than developing their own opinions on things. And so it's like an average. It's like if you were to take everybody in the world and average out like their general feelings and thoughts on things, and it's a very rough kind of representation of it, but it's basically kind of like that, and so it's almost as if humanity, these way that they represent information is almost as if humanity, which you would know this reference if you'd watched Star Trek, so you need to watch it.
Okay,
is like the Borg collective, which is a hive mind, and they basically all interlink with each other and like share thoughts and opinions, and then come to a conclusion on things. Much like Bayesian networks do, and all this kind of other stuff, and so what you're getting as a result is is the highest, typically is going to be somewhere near the highest likelihood outcome with a certain amount of intentional randomness and variance put in there. But like, they don't have, there's no thread to follow, like no personality thread that you can follow through the why and decisions and whatnot. And the reason for that is that it doesn't have experience. It's not trained off of experiential data of its own making. It's trained off of a massive amount of other people's experiential data.
Yeah.
And so if you wanted to create something with more personality or that was going to be similar, it would be as if you were to train a large language model. You could have a large language model like follow you around throughout life, learning and training on words and conversations and whatnot. And it would learn to mimic like your personality kind of in that context. But if you were to just have it go around on its own, doing, listening to random conversations and learning from them, like say you were to build it into an ATM machine or something like that, so that you were picking up conversations around human style thinking and interaction, because it would develop its own biased personality. And typically in machine learning, we try to avoid biases in most cases. And so there's just kind of a fundamental difference about how you would go about that if you wanted to have a more realistic representation or mimicry of humans. And we're super complex. There's a lot of factors that are involved in that beyond just your experiential data. You've got your genetics and your sensory inputs that drive your more primal attraction towards certain environments or avoidance of other environments. And
it's actually quite sad how little we know about the genetic factors that play into intelligence. There's a lot of hope for a couple of decades that they would find specific genes that are dedicated to more complex intelligence, like those that humans have. But it seems to be correlated with many, even thousands potentially of genetic sequences that all play a small part when it comes to the different aspects of intelligence. And, what is promising though, I will say, is mapping out genetic factors when it comes to different aspects of memory. And we know that plays a big role in your ability to consolidate memories as well as process them. And as well as recall them. That plays a really big role, especially in working memory and solving complex tasks in the moment. That is actually something that we can look forward to in the coming, I would say, 10, 20 years, is being able to actually manipulate successfully the amount of recall and memory consolidation that we are able to do because of our understanding of genetic factors in memory.
Yeah.
So I think that we're headed in the right direction. And when it comes to AI and consciousness and having that experiential aspect of it, I see that the end result, even past artificial general intelligence and its ability to be like a superhuman, fundamentally, is that it will act more as an artificial extension, as another organ, another limb that we integrate for practical purposes into ourselves. And it gets to vicariously be conscious through our conscious experience. That seems to be the direction that I think.
It's like we are its live sensory input.
Exactly. And I think, we could get pretty teleologically deep in its meaning here, because you could even say that the purpose of our developed complexity was to overcome the genetic limitations of intelligence. that it was actually sequenced for that purpose, and why we have such a easy time rapidly advancing technologies, because that is what we were meant for, was to overcome that and to finally fully realize environmental manipulation and complete our environmental integration. That might have been the purpose of intelligence itself.
And there's an interesting component of what makes up intelligence, because here's one of the reasons I have a problem with IQ tests. And I think most actually intelligent people do have problems with IQ tests.
Oh, for sure.
Is because of the fact that they test a very small and relatively inconsequential portion of intelligence, separated out from the rest of what makes intelligence, like makes up intelligence and its importance. So it's like they almost take your processing abilities, try to take your processing abilities on their own, without accounting for your anything in your hippocampus. Like,
sure.
it's like without accounting for your knowledge and your memory. Like, knowledge is a huge part of what makes up intelligence. The amount of knowledge that you have and quality of that knowledge, like, yes, you need processing faculties to be able to utilize that, for sure. That's important. But you could have great processing faculties and no knowledge, and you would like be at a significant disadvantage to somebody that had a broader knowledge base.
Yeah.
And and a bigger knowledge base. And they don't test for that kind of thing. So beyond just this kind of systematic problems, like the fact that they don't account for people that work better not under pressure versus under pressure, and people that that have difficulty focusing or solving problems that they don't see as relevant.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the questions that are designed are designed to be generalized and not specific to any knowledge base. That's problematic for people that have difficulty focusing on things that don't seem particularly relevant. And like me, for example. And I mean, for years when I was a kid, as a child, I had difficulty studying and I had difficulty getting good grades because I didn't see the relevance of anything I was working on. And I hated it. And as soon as I did, I latched onto those things and started absorbing them on my own and integrating them. And, it doesn't account for those things. And it also doesn't account for your knowledge bases. So it doesn't test anything having to do with knowledge and your memories. And there's, I'd say for most people, there's probably an element of variability here. For most people, your brain networks are going to be somewhat similar, but they're going to be tuned slightly differently, or your processing networks are going to be somewhat similar, but they're going to be tuned slightly differently depending on your values. For instance, some personalities and people value social situations, much more than I do. And so they're going to be better at navigating social interactions and better at a lot of different, social things than I would. And for me, I value like intrinsic knowledge and logic and like understanding, especially. And so when it comes to being right about things in the world, like I'm probably going to have the advantage over them.
Yeah.
And that is all determined by our value system, and it doesn't make one person more intelligent necessarily than the other. It's a different way of a different thing, a different like set of things that you're going to be better at. And what really I feel like defines intelligence is the amount of information that you retain and can pull from in order to make those decisions. And so, you kind of have to, when you're looking at intelligence, you have to evaluate, okay, what is the area of specialization of their network? So what areas are they not good at? What areas are they good at? Okay, this person's really good at social. This person's really good at logical processing. Like those components, you have to determine that, and then determine what their knowledge base is that they're pulling from.
I kind of want to talk a little bit about the education system when it comes to this, because it does not accentuate personal skills and personal ways of doing things. And honestly, it's actually very interesting. There were a couple of schools in Texas that integrated personal AIs for each of their students. And they noticed across the board for everyone, a 7% increase in test scores. So that was very interesting. Once you start to have systems that are able to adapt and understand the needs of the individual, they're able to pull out the best aspects of somebody. I would call myself someone who's a little more logical as well. And the only part of social ability that I would say I'm fairly decent at is being able to bring out the best in people. And what I notice is that there's a lot of correlation between what I do and what I notice, or how I notice AI interacts with me, and how it personalizes with me and helps me understand information based off of past conversations that I've had with it. It updates its memory, understands, and tailors to my needs and understanding. And I think that, with the current future and the direction that especially America and probably some other nations are going, I think that that's actually might be something to look forward to, is the integration of AI within schools that are able to then learn and personalize information for each student so that they don't feel lost and feel like there's no relevance.
Yeah.
There's only relevance to them. Even if it's the same subjects, it becomes more personable and more empathetic.
Especially if we're not going to pay our teachers better and pay to have more teachers. Like I could see the integration of AI being a really useful tool in that case, because you're not spreading your teachers as thin, and you're allowing the kids to be reached on a level that, like, I use AI to stoke my curiosity. Like a lot of times if I'm curious about something and I want quick information on it in order to determine if it's something that I want to look more into, I will use an AI to answer some of those initial questions that I have about it.
Definitely.
And I think it's important to be able to do your own research and to validate, certain findings, important findings, or things that you're receiving. Like, I don't think you should solely rely on it, but just like you shouldn't solely rely on anyone for information. But
exactly. Except you, when it comes to coding. I will be relying on you.
I would not. I mean, you can heavily rely on something, but like never. I will say never.
Also, be taking
never like discount the possibility that your source is wrong.
Yeah.
Like, I will be wrong from time to time. I'm not right 100% of the time.
And, I think that's honestly a good thing, because I'm someone who really likes to ask questions. If I don't understand something, I will ask any relevant question to make sure that I completely comprehend what we're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, like, and if you're like, oh, wait, I didn't explain that right. You're right. That's an interesting question. Let's go discover it together. And honestly, that process in itself would be so beneficial for both of us, you know? And honestly, kind of one of the interesting things about teachers is that I love teachers. I think they're great. One of the main things that I hope for, no matter what you think about President Trump, the only thing that I'm looking for to determine if he's a good or bad president is if he raises the wages of teachers. He got rid of a lot of the legality issues when it comes to teacher unions and why their ability to earn more money has been suppressed. He got rid of the Department of Education, which is the legal team that kind of supervises that and has been pretty detrimental to that process. And I know he's establishing like the American Academy Association, which is going to be a little bit different. I don't know how that's going to play out, but if it ends up with teachers being paid more, I think that'll be great.
Yeah, like I am. First off, I've not been a fan of any politician forever, and like this is coming from me as somebody that has been aired more on the side of disliking Trump as a concept, and has not particularly been a fan at all of his in the past, or just not really had much of a opinion one way or the other. But I was aired more on the side of like not particularly liking him. However, you cannot argue with results, and there's been a lot of things that he's done recently. It seems like his first term, he learned a lot. And,
I would say so.
The second term, he is doing a lot of things that really needed to be done for a long time. Like, it's felt a lot like we've had a really messy rundown house that we're living in.
That's for sure.
And the faucet doesn't work. The toilets get backed up all the time. Like the doors creak and all that kind of stuff. And nobody has done anything about it, and it feels like we finally got somebody that is replacing our faucets and getting things fixed.
I mean, what's really impressed me is the transparency, I think.
Yeah.
There isn't anything that he's hiding. He's actually exclaiming it from the rooftops and saying, this is exactly what I'm doing, and you can see that I'm doing it. And honestly,
which is the best thing he can do, like as far as him being perceived as not a politician, which is going to be beneficial to him.
Is his main appeal. I think if he were to play it conservative, he probably would have gotten an election.
He would just hide away and do his own thing, which to be honest, I'd like to say if I were in his shoes, I would choose to be really open about things too. But like my tendency is to like sequester myself while I'm working. And so if I were in his shoes, I can't say that I probably would have done that to the extent that he's doing it.
I think I would have been probably somewhat similar, but a little more respectful and mature about the decisions, and probably worded things a little bit differently.
Yeah. And by that, and I think this might be why some people like him, but there's one of the things that's always bugged me about him is that he repeats himself so much, and he takes so long to get to his point. He makes his point clearly, but he puts it very simply, does not give a lot of information about it, and takes so long to actually finish what he's saying. And I've gotten it by the first couple words that came out of his mouth, where he was going with it, and I don't need all that. But I feel like that's why a lot of people like him, is because he doesn't couch things in fancy language, and he doesn't confuse people with terminologies. He says things really simply, directly, and then repeats them over and over and over again, which is probably why people like him. And I feel like that's probably an area that I would maybe not even reach people on a level that he, if I were in his position, because I would likely want to explain things very clearly, and I'd want to explain the details and make sure people knew exactly the whys and whatnot.
I mean, that's personally what I appreciate the most personally. And I think for me, one of the things that kind of caught me off guard was how his kind of more simple nature of explaining things kind of makes me question his more complex motives, I guess. And I'm not able to really grasp them like I am with other politicians. And so I don't know where his fault lies besides his personality.
Right.
It's he's not an idiot, obviously, and he's
But
surrounded
he
by people who are
does
not idiots.
sound like one sometimes.
Exactly. He's got concepts of a plan instead of an actual
Like
plan. But
the image of himself that he presents is one of a, like, and this is why I think I initially was pretty off put, was that he is so vague and doesn't delve into details, and he says things in a very simple minded format. And basically as simple as you can possibly say it is how he says it. And like, we've got the best people working on it. They're all working on it. We called in all the best people. We've got experts from all over the world. Like,
they're all working on it.
Like, it's like he repeats himself multiple times in multiple simple ways. And it's like, it just like, for me, that kind of communication style doesn't really mesh. And it strikes me as somebody that doesn't know what they're talking about usually, rather than somebody that does, because they're beating around the bush. Like, it feels like they're just repeating themselves because they don't have anything else to say about it.
And the best people that should be in office usually will never be a politician, ever. That's kind of just the nature of how these things work.
Because they don't gravitate towards that kind of position, because it's too messy and mucky and doesn't align with their interests and their values.
And since they're not able to navigate that, if they do attempt, they're not personable enough to be able to actually secure an election. And I think that's even on a local and a state level as well. I think that's the case.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that's why you usually end up with people like Enneagram 8s and 1s that tend to end up in those positions, because you have the ones that are super driven and want to rule the world, basically. And then you have the 8s that are big on creating a crowd of people around them and like ruling those people, basically. Like kind of, they do it more for the people that they're going to be influencing, rather than the like control or the system,
and it kind of goes back to their own experience, and that's going to be completely biased to how they view things. They're not looking for an objective way to bring out the best in everyone, to create that hive mind like culture that is altruistic and benefits each other. They're going to impose their own hedonistic understanding of reality, and only that, since that ego is going to be personified and then influenced into the culture, which is kind of sad that there doesn't seem to be anyone who has power. Though I would say the Prime Minister of India is actually a really good example of someone who is an 8, but has kind of disillusioned his own ego and is fully focused on other people, but is still that crowd gathering type personality. I think he's a really good example. There's this podcast that I listened to with him and Lex Friedman. Really good podcast. So I definitely recommend listening to it. And it's it's kind of like, who was that one dictator who was like, democracy is for the people and by the people, but the people I'm not going to say the actual word, but the people are stupid, you know, and they're going to elect the people they can relate to that are just as stupid as them. So they feel that personable aspect, that they feel like they can understand and relate to the decisions that somebody makes while they're being manipulated behind the people running by businessmen, the elites, who are able to then curate the correct environment for their benefit, you know?
Yeah.
I actually had I forgot how we kind of got on this topic, but I think you mentioned schools, education, and then Trump. But I was thinking about it. It kind of hit me that we are still kind of on the path of this kind of self-preservation evolutionary process. And each person is still propagating forward their genetic sequences in order for further, enhancement of their genes and environment to be able to integrate into it. And the people who have done that successfully are the ones at the very top.
Yeah.
And they've done that through a very self-preserving evolutionary, understanding of reality, even if it's unconscious. But they're doing it. I realize it's like,
that's what drives all of our selfish behavior. But
yeah, and it kind of makes me stand at a really interesting point where I have no hate towards what they've done and how they've controlled people, because they're simply following what.
Well, how can you have? I mean, you really can't when you understand that people are products of their experiences and their circumstances and what they were born with and whatnot. And like, you can't be mad at people for being what they are. That's they had no choice in the matter.
Will I resist them? Absolutely.
Oh yeah. Will I try and overthrow them? Would I be okay with them not being here? Sure.
Absolutely.
But and I think that I was thinking that one of the best combinations I think that we could have for presidency would be a one president with a 5 vice president. Somebody that has the charisma and the drive to lead people and to handle the pressure of that role, and then somebody close to them that has influence, that is a 5 and cares about like the actual knowledge, and the is the person that can help come up with solutions for things and plans and whatnot, and develop a system that will help kind of resolve things. And I think if you ended up with healthy versions of both of those temperaments in that role, you would get a whole lot done.
Yeah. I mean, there's a people who own businesses necessarily have to be smart. You have to see
intelligence, and then surround yourself with those people and get them on board with your vision.
and the ability to do both of that would be pretty nice, I will say. That combination, I think, really is what makes a business successful.
Well, and there's a lot of different factors there. Like,
so many. It's a very layman explanation.
Your drive and dedication are the huge. Surrounding yourself with other people, that are good at it, they can help too. Like, all those things can help. And it's really when you have like all those things in tandem, like that kind of provide the most optimal situation.
Yeah.
But you got to have at least like, one of those things and really capitalize on it in order to kind of set yourself up for success.
Yeah, and then the underlying factors of actually having a successful and replicable model that can actually be used, and then on top of that more complex network of people you can socialize with and build a team with is, I think, a really good way of understanding kind of the simple ways of how to create a successful business. Because if it's not replicable, even on a really small scale, then there's no reason for you to hire a super incredible team and be sociable with all these people if the actual business model itself isn't something that's usable or is really much needed.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that has to do with luck, and the needs of people, which are always fluctuating, and new things are coming out that deal with specific tasks. And sometimes those tasks have multiple ways of being dealt with, and sometimes somebody monopolizes a certain way, and the other way is really kind of thrown out with the bath in the baby water, all of it's wrong.
The bath in the baby water?
It's kind of like
the bath in the baby water?
Yeah, or the
baby in the bath water?
Baby in the bath water. I think I said that wrong. Don't throw out the baby water with the bath. You know what I mean? But
oh my God, that's I want to use that expression from now on. The bath in the baby water.
Sometimes you got to throw the whole tub out too. Sometimes they do, because they don't want anyone else, taking a bath. And they're another place maybe you want to take a shower instead.
True.
Yeah, isn't good for babies. Usually, you don't want to put them in a shower.
If I were running a team full of people, it's a little bit of a jumping topic. It does not have to do with bathing or showering.
We can move past that.
If I was managing a team of people that had to work together, I would be very intentional about like who landed on what team. And in fact, I'd probably have them all do personality profile tests for the areas that were likely to be weak points, as well as capitalized on each other's strengths. So like having fives with sevens and ones, like that would be a really strong combo, because you have fives that will that will get excited and inspired by seven visionary, kind of visionary elements, and fives will help support like ones in their goal oriented nature, and ones will help drive the team.
Yeah.
And so like by combining those together, you cover those weak areas. And
kind of going back to education, imagine if that model is implemented in schools where we have systems that completely understand personality and assign different groups together based off of those personalities and understanding of each other, and see which ones work better and how people work and function. And then through that, being able to bring out the best in, different groups of people. I think that would be something that's really interesting to look at, Yeah.
And even, you could even throw in a random element of like, almost like a kind of a Gaussian noise component that, in order to avoid tuning these children too much to a single way of thinking or doing things, you could do things like have components that don't fit, but that are integrated in temporarily. And like, for instance, maybe you have like certain people switch for a day, groups, and one person that doesn't really fit as well comes over here to this group, just to expose them to other ways of doing things and thinking.
And you can even find that maybe they actually enjoy that process a little bit more.
Maybe it resonates,
And then you'll also be able to find the people who are able to adapt to different groups, and then understanding that that's their superpower is, I think, huge. I mean, understanding the way that I work, I think, was one of the most beneficial factors when it came to truly being able to accelerate my understanding and learning as a human being, understanding where my strengths lie, where my weaknesses lie,
and the why you do what you do.
Exactly. I was going to mention earlier, like when you talked about like learning environments under pressure. For me, when it comes to learning new information, I do it infinitely better under pressure. But when it comes to regurgitating past information that I learned, I don't do it very well. So there are different types of learning that come into play when it comes to those environmental pressures. And I think understanding those types of things and how to overcome those strengths and use those strengths to overcome weaknesses, and then being able to cultivate that, I think would be something that everyone needs to learn how to do.
There's also like levels of pressure too. Like if it's immediate pressure, if it's if it's kind of medial pressure, if it's long-term pressure, like there's those types. Because for me, under short-term pressure or immediate pressure, I typically don't perform well. Like it confuses me. It doesn't, I can't evaluate what to focus on properly and what to actually do. And it provides like too much noise for me to actually sit down and decide. But a more medium level of pressure where it's a general, like this needs to be done quickly kind of a thing, but there's not anybody sitting there waiting for it to be done kind of scenario. That kind of scenario can be very helpful for me because it provides enough motivation through negative pressure to get me to decide on a path rather than just, because a lot of times what hinders me is the evaluation process of what is the best thing to pursue here. Like what is the most appropriate course of action? What has the likeliest chance of success? Those kind of questions. And so I get stuck in that realm and can't really make a decision.
Yeah.
And so that extra pressure to make that decision forces me down one of those paths, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. Totally. I mean, I would say I'm fairly somewhat similar. I mean, personally, I like putting myself under pressure. That to me is my favorite.
Chosen pressure. Yeah.
Chosen pressure. You know, like when it comes to my exams, I tell myself my entire life is writing on this exam. And that to me is somehow able to kind of open up this new abstract realm where I can fully just have this flow state, which is kind of interesting.
It's almost like you're cognitively like faking a scenario in order to create emotional significance.
Yeah, exactly. I was actually going to mention that because when it came to my early childhood and through just different, life cycles over the years of my early development,
life-threatening scenarios.
Yeah. And a lot of the times that I excelled, even when it came to more arbitrary things, like getting in trouble, these heightened emotional responses would be the times that I would adapt to the environment. And no matter how terrible the situation would be, it would excite myself to be able to pursue a different direction that was better realized for the environment. And so I try to simulate these same emotional responses that help me grasp onto something that I see as structural and real, and then continue down that path. I think I try to apply that as well in school as well, which has had some interesting results, I will say. And when I don't care about something, I usually do bad at it. Yeah. It's, it's kind of how the way things works. And what's nice is you convince yourself to care about it. It's hard, it's difficult, but if you do have this emotional significance that you can associate with it, there is an aspect where you can kind of stimulate your almost desperation from the concept.
Interesting. That must be where the downside to my emotional filtration system, because sometimes as I have difficulty, actually almost all the time, I have difficulty engaging with something that I don't find particularly interesting or relevant, even if it is important or necessary, for some reason. And most of the time it has to do with because I don't feel a large emotional pressure, I think, like in order to enough to make that something that is something that I assign value to, If I had uncontrolled emotions, like that would be like, oh my God, it's life or death. Like we need to do this now. Like, but like my filtration systems are stopping that all from happening. So it's like it's more of like this is probably something you should focus on, when in fact my brain really needs you need to do this now.
Instead, you're just going to give yourself a slight nudge. Feel like, hey, look at this real quick. You don't have to do it.
Right.
But that might have something there.
Whatever you want to do. I mean,
well, I'm just pointing out that this could be something that is life-threatening. Which, that's actually really, I would love to dive a little bit into the neural mechanisms of survival, like actual real in-time survival. And it's, to me, someone who didn't feel a lot of emotions when I was a kid, having those more life-threatening situations that I've dealt with on a couple of occasions, thinking back, it's an interesting phenomena because you feel so real. Things become more primal, and awareness is heightened to a degree that you really don't get in modern civilization. It's unlike anything I've ever experienced, really, and have experienced in the past couple of years. I would say the closest thing that I got to that was watching a documentary on predators on shrooms. That was probably the closest thing that I got to that same primal experience. And even then, it was nothing like the real.
Yeah,
truly nothing. I mean, I wouldn't recommend getting yourself in life-threatening situations. But if you do find yourself or maybe you have PTSD from one of those situations, I would really recommend doing some really deep meditation or self-reflection into the true experience of that situation, which will give you a really nice connection to this type of real dynamic living that you can try to carry over into your everyday life. That really helps with enjoying the more mundane aspects of experience because you start to enjoy it more because you understand how valuable and how innate it is to need to survive.
See, what's interesting is, like, for me, when I was younger, I didn't often experience quite as I didn't experience very many particularly life-threatening events, but I experienced a lot of high stress intensity events, and
maybe the similar responses.
Right. And a lot of like drawn out kind of periods of stress and conflict and whatnot. And it's interesting how our systems adapted to almost better navigate the situations that we grew up with. Like, you didn't experience a lot of emotions, but you experienced some pretty intense ones, and now you realize the value of intense emotions and kind of pulling value from life through that. And for me, like, I developed a lot of processing, like, because of the regular intervals of that, like, of that intensity. I developed a lot of processing along with it in order to be able to kind of handle and filter that stuff out. And so, like, while I ended up with kind of a similar like place with both of us tending to look at things at a little bit more of a logical, reasoned view, there is still a slight, like, almost like different angle that we're coming at. Mine is more of like a flatter, like a everything kind of tamped down with almost like a rolling hill kind of a scenario, whereas yours is like
a lot higher,
like,
which is interesting that you mentioned that, because that's exactly what I would say how I learn. Is it's actually really interesting where I know that I'm cooking up something good in my brain and I can't remember anything. It's completely unconscious. It's so fascinating. I'll be spending last summer, I was spending usually like, I would say even 12 hours a day, fully researching, fully studying everything I could just grasp. And after 2 or 3 months of that, if you were to ask me to explain what an actual potential is, I would have been like, let, I don't know. But if you were to ask me 2 weeks later from that, I would be able to give you the most intricate, precise detail as to what an actual potential is and how it interacts with the other systems that I knew at that moment.
Wait, say the time periods again. A month. You said a month later versus
like 2 months later
versus
of deep diving into everything.
So 2 months later after having done that versus 2 weeks after that.
And then and so like after those 2 weeks I would say like after that 2 months, getting to like that third month period or like 2.5 month period, you would see just an explosion of information come out of me. And I would write, like
wait. You said after.
Sorry, I meant like 2 months, and after that 2 months, it'd be like, oh, but then 2 weeks later, after those 2 months, you would talk to me again. I'd be able to give you something really
okay. So you're saying for 2 months, you wouldn't be able to do really anything with that information. And then 2 weeks after that 2 months, which is a very odd way of saying it because you're actually saying 2 months and 2 weeks, you wouldn't be able to do anything with that information.
That's kind of what I meant.
And then right after that, like you'd have this explosion.
And so I would know that I was learning something if I wasn't able to remember anything. And it was this really weird process that would happen. And it's gotten a lot better. It's more consistent now, but just because that was just kind of the way that I knew how to process information was a slow cultivation of kind of just like mundane dual nothingness that lied within my unconscious into this explosion of meaningful and rich information that all correlated and makes sense with each other. And that's kind of how
interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of like how I developed some of my theories about like the plenum, MISE, like the maximally elongated informational experiential success framework that I have.
I think that might be how a lot of information, especially with new topics, is gained. Because I had a similar experience when I was learning Python, where I went through several weeks of mundane like lessons, gradually starting to kind of get concepts and how they worked and whatnot. And it was like pulling hen's teeth to kind of get anywhere. And then I would eventually reach a point in that process when I had been doing the same things like enough that it led to an explosion of understanding and integration, and everything started making sense. And so I think it might be time processing.
I mean, that's definitely what it is. I just noted that it was very much over accentuated in me because even if like I fully grasp one topic, if I were to then move on to to a different topic, more nuanced topic, that past integration of information that I had would disappear during that new time.
Oh, of course, you're not utilizing it again.
And even if it was correlated, it was a very interesting phenomena that I just became a lot more conscious and aware of. And it was kind of fun.
Go ahead. Sorry, I just had something.
That's pretty much it.
I was just going to say, it's interesting because I was thinking of the other day, the value that we place on, for some reason, the value that we place on putting something in our working memory, short-term or working memory. And the fact that we place so much value on accessing things from our short-term and working memory over and over again. Like, for instance, when we're doing memorizing stuff for school tests, or we're doing flashcards, or something like that. How we handle those tasks is by repeating it over and over again, and like putting in our short-term memory, taking it out, putting it out, putting it, taking it out, like this constant process. And the short-term contribution of the short-term memory, and just the repeated, retrieving something and putting it in the short-term memory, contributes relatively little to the overall like consolidation and integration of a memory. And what you really want to be doing is, like, there are two primary mechanisms that have a huge influence. One is retrieving it from long-term memory and putting it back in your long-term memory. So day to day, after you integrate it, during sleep, once your brain integrates it further into your hippocampus, retrieve it again, pull it out, use it, let your hippocampus put it back in when you sleep. And like that constant, like that process really helps like refine that and kind of show you meaningful features from it.
Oh, for sure.
Then if you combine that with some sort of way of adding emotional significance to it, emotions like have a huge, can help a whole lot in what your brain deciding what is important for you to store.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting because I have this method of remembering names where instead of trying to memorize their name, I assign an emotional significance to the experience of them telling me their name. And I noticed that actually.
So how did I feel? Almost reflecting on like how you felt.
And the actual like visual representation and like hearing their voice tell me their name. And then assigning kind of that value. And I noticed that actually helped a whole lot when it came to, because I was a coach for around 3 years and I would get constant influxes of new kids each season that I would teach soccer and then gymnastics. I would, be in lots of different classes. I kind of just developed over time this understanding, as well as listening to some experts and then personalizing it through that assigning the emotional significance, and then since I'm more imagined person, imagining that experience and that emotional significance behind it really helped me when it came to really learning someone's name.
Right. And it's not just about it's not about necessarily about the emotional significance with the general concept or the scenario. Like for instance, if somebody told me their name and I just like started thinking about the emotional significance of meeting them, like that might not actually be beneficial. It might help me remember the event of meeting them, but like you have to do it specifically with the thing that you're trying to remember in order to draw that correlation. Because for me, a lot of times I remember people and their faces and their mannerisms and like things about them like really, really well. I'm terrible with names. Like I will not remember even people that I like it will take me a long time to remember their names.
Yeah. And then you feel bad for asking them after like knowing them for a couple of months.
Right.
God dang it.
And it's, because I've assigned emotional significance to their presence and to their like them as a person and my experience with them, but I don't care about their name because I care about like the fact that they have a personality I like, and so there's like that ends up falling kind of by the wayside there because it doesn't get included in that emotional significance component. And so there's like that element of you almost have to like force yourself to connect the right dots, like if you want to remember those intricate components.
And for me, there was an actual value in remembering their name because they were my students and I had to remember the names if I wanted to be a good coach. And so there was already that underlying factor that gave me this value that then was able to really help me give at least a baseline emotional significance to the experience, So that was also helpful. I will say when it came to memorizing the parents' names, I don't know a single of the parents' names.
To be honest, there have been
very cool.
There have been even girls that I've liked in the past that I could not remember their names. Like, and it's not I didn't care about them. Like
I care about you, just not.
Your name is like it's like irrelevant to me. Like, I mean, sure, like it's nice to have something to call you, but like you are the thing that I care about, like not your name. Like,
that's funny. That's actually pretty great. When you look at like people with like savant syndrome, right? They'll what's interesting is like the guy who can go on and on and on and on for hours and hours and hours about the numbers of pi. He does is that he in his imagination is walking through his childhood neighborhood in each mail. Or pi. It's kind of like things like that. And then you can kind of do it on like a normal baseline level, and that, and then they can even be just important, valuable or
Just
different
remember.
aspects of who you are, like the precursors into what made you who you are, and then aligning yourself with that and aligning new information with that. Just there's a lot less noise.
Mm.
You know,
I've tried that memory technique before, and I found that it doesn't work for me.
Really?
And I think it's probably because I think what?
If you're not autistic.
What does that have to do with anything?
Savant syndrome. I was making a joke. Never mind.
Oh. That's a memory technique, like going to using things that you remember well and have some sort of, seeming and emotional significance from childhood or something to remember other things. And I've tried that before, but I always run into like it not getting integrated anywhere. Like it's like it, and I think probably has to do with the fact that while those things are integrated memories and they do have some level of emotional resonance, that resonance is too low for them to get integrated. And there's not enough emotional significance there for it to kind of see it as important.
I would say so as well, especially because I developed all of these cognitive boundaries between different aspects of who I was when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I think, that how, it's interesting because I think there's actually a lot of environmental factors that come into play into intelligence rather than genetic ones, even though we love to say that intelligence is determined at birth and how smart your parents are and how smart your grandparents are. I genuinely think that is a terrible way of looking at it.
It's a choice.
It's a choice. It's 100% a choice. If you were to do an IQ test to me at 5, I would guarantee I would get you'd give me the same score as I have now. But if you were to IQ test me at 15, I would be.
Wait, if I were to IQ test you at 5?
Then I think that
you're saying you're more intelligent now than you were at 5 years old?
Well, I would say when it comes to like IQ, I would have gotten pretty much the same score as I was when I was a kid. But if you were to get me,
I would love to have a way to actually validate that, because I don't think I think you're underestimating yourself. Like I don't think that's.
Well,
I've never met a 5-year-old that has even close to a similar level of processing ability and intelligence as you. Like I think the fact that you, even just given a broader knowledge base that you were pulling from, that would make even a significant difference in your.
I guess so, but I think there's standardized IQ tests for different age ranges, right? And so
you're talking about your relative IQ for your age. Okay, I can see that. For me, that would not be the case. Like I probably, even with my relative IQ, because of the fact that as an adult, I progressed more towards tasks that would be useful for solving the types of questions that they ask. I've gradually gotten better at those kinds of problems, and I've seen the relevance to certain ways of thinking that assist there. So I think that as an adult, like I would have achieved a far higher score than if I had taken the test, as a kid. I think I would have probably been a dum-dum as a kid.
Well, that's very interesting. I think I've actually mentioned this before on an earlier podcast, but there was this guy who gave his testimony about how he's a theoretical physicist now, but pretty much he throughout his whole life got terrible test scores. He considered himself really dumb, not that smart, and on he had to study for SAT. He didn't really do that at all. He just was unmotivated. He thought school was worthless. And
just like he's describing my life.
And what was interesting is that when he got his SAT score back, it was almost a perfect score.
Okay, he's not describing my life.
And what's interesting, so he was like, oh, and his family was like, wait, you might actually have a brain. You might actually be really smart. And
his family, God, his family's terrible.
And he was like, wait, you're right. I might actually be able to do something. I might actually be able to do intelligent things. And that belief instilled in him, and he started to become what he most wanted to be, which is what he thought he was not. And 20 years later, he got a letter from the SAT, whoever deals with the SATs, the education department. And he said, and they were like, sorry, yours was actually, you were actually sent the wrong one. This was yours. And it was a really, really low test score.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
But that belief
was what allowed him to accelerate his potential to a degree that was just, he thought was impossible.
That is so fascinating. And it really goes to show the value of our value system.
Exactly.
And what's interesting is there's a similar correlation that I've experienced in when I got my SAT scores back. I got back the real ones, and they were not good. They were just mediocre, you know. And it's kind of like the same with everything that I did. It was just like mediocre, nothing particularly special. And it wasn't until as an adult, I started, there was a couple things that happened. One was I went through some really such intense emotional experiences that I had to start learning how to process emotions better and develop some of those processing abilities. But the other thing was, and I noticed this later, one of the things that I can remember the most frequently my dad saying ever since I was a kid to an adult, despite all the issues I had growing up as a child and some of the parenting choices that probably were not the best, there was one thing that he did that I think really shaped a lot of who I ended up becoming, because it's one of the things that I remember the most, is he kept on repeating the phrase, and usually it was in the context of criticism, but initial criticism. But he kept on telling me that I was a really smart kid. And he just would always repeat that. Again, he normally was couched in a criticism of why are you doing this? This is such a bad choice to make. You're a really smart kid, but kind of thing. Sometimes it wasn't, but that even into adulthood, I kept on hearing him say that over and over again. And then there were a couple other kind of elements that added value. Like a lot of my friends would come to me for help with things because they knew that I probably knew how to do it. And a lot of my friends would almost boast for me about how well versed I was in a lot of different subjects. So there was a large there started kind of getting this more and more value assigned to the concept of intelligence and understanding, and a larger and larger belief that was something that I could become and was something I was actually headed towards anyway.
Yeah.
And so with that was oh, I should embrace this because this is important. Obviously, this is important because it's something I've heard ever since I was, young, that this is important, and was a huge source of frustration because I felt like I wasn't intelligent. But now I find out that I'm actually could be. And so it kind of spawns that sprint towards it, and to kind of almost make up for the feeling that you had of inadequacy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting how that kind of initial feeling of inadequacy and then the revelation of you don't have to be inadequate, or you might not be inadequate, kind of spawns that embracing of it.
I think it was in my high school chemistry class. That was actually the first time that I understood what it meant to be a scientist. There was my teacher, he was, I forget what it was, but it was this certain process that you could observe in nature. And he was talking about the underlying principles of it, and I actually grasped it. I could see it, I could visualize it in the real world. And that was kind of the beginning of this more abstract skill that I got. And what was interesting is in my younger years, I applied that process to theology, actually. That for me, it was grasping the underlying principles of religion, theology, and divinity.
So that's what your family assigned importance to.
Exactly. And I really just did a deep dive into the biblical narrative, understanding the relationship between God and man, what it means for us to reach up towards the divine, what heaven and hell represent. I knew that what the modern church was preaching was wrong, that it couldn't be the case, that it had to be something else that we're missing something that was lost in history, that is meant for us to be found again. And through that, I developed all of these crazy theories that terrified actually a lot of my friends that were very devout Christians, and were like, you make a lot of sense, and that really scares me, because it kind of goes against what I would talk about, goes against the entire dogmas of what the Christian church was saying, and my parents actually really appreciated it.
What kind of friends did you have that were even willing to hear that kind of stuff? Because I had thoughts on how that stuff was wrong when I was little, and expressed that kind of thing a couple times, and got so like shut down because of the like the taboo kind of nature of that, of even hearing that kind of stuff, that I just eventually started keeping those thoughts to myself, and thinking that I was a bad person for questioning, that kind of stuff. And until it got to the point where I had a thought in my head that made so much sense that it unraveled everything like that else. And I had no choice but to reevaluate.
Well, I have my really close friend Caleb. He is someone who's very interested in that stuff, and so he loves to have those types of conversations with me. He's very open to that. And then my parents, have really been ostracized by the church as well, because they have very unconventional beliefs. And so that environment kind of instilled this understanding that this is actually a good thing to do.
Oh yeah, see, that's the opposite of my family.
And through that, especially my dad would be like, you are a genius when it comes to this stuff. You are incredibly smart. And I was like,
see how that
really?
Positive reinforcement helps develop and reinforce the value of that behavior. Like, you've developed like pretty significant abstract thinking faculties over the years. Obviously that was something that you learned to assign value to.
Yeah. And then through that, I was like, it kind of dawned on me that, wait, I might actually be able to understand very complicated things that normal people can't and misinterpret. And I realized the nature of finding misinformation and turning that into something that's real and can be effectively used. And I then kind of applied that mindset. And that was kind of, after that point, was kind of when I had my really big emotional downfall when I went to my girlfriend, and we had to separate.
It was after it for me, but around that time.
It was that kind of happened beforehand when it came to like divinity and theology. And then after that very negative emotional significance hit me, I was at my lowest. I had this transient hypofrontal experience of the self shutting down and my values being projected in front of me, and understanding
your value system falling apart, kind of.
Yeah, it's completely breaking apart, and I had the opportunity to continue down this path that I knew was going to fail me.
And then just not believe in anything you did because you saw the flaw. Yeah,
exactly. It was practically either continue on a road that would lead me to practically suicide, or transforming who I was fundamentally. And I chose to transform who I was fundamentally. And through that, the only thought in my head, the only thing I obsessed with was truth. What is truth? What does that even mean? And I took the abstract thinking capabilities and utilized that to deconstruct every simple axiom that we take for granted and cultivate that to have a meaningful and rich model of success for finding truth and to integrate myself into society and have a genuine positive experience.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting how there's such a deep experiential aspect when it comes to pursuing a more what people would call a intelligent life. It's
a well-informed life.
A well-informed life. You know, there's always something deep that grasps the psyche.
Yes.
That is from your past. And
usually based in something that is well-grounded. Like it's something that has value. Like for instance, the values that I started with were, like I could probably name them like off my head. It was like, I was taught that even though I didn't particularly value it a whole lot, I was taught that it was really important culturally for you to project an air of religious like mentality and to conform to those beliefs. So I did that. And I believed it was important for me to find a wife. So I was trying to do that. And along with that came my emotions being wrapped up into it. And I believed that it was, important to be liked by people and to not question certain things and all this other stuff. And then I got to a point when those values were causing me enough problems and kind of caused enough problems in a conglomerate short period of time that it brought me to a state where I was willing to start questioning some of that. And I did. And because of my experience and my kind of processing abilities that I had started building up to be able to handle like stress and whatnot. And I kind of, came at it from a slightly different angle, more of a generalized rather than an abstract, like a very kind of specific detail oriented, approach. But like basically kind of a similar thing where like I saw my values like falling apart. And then once I saw the flaw in one value, I started seeing the flaws in the others. And like, it was all like, I can either keep on. And, I was taught to believe that like free will was like a thing and yada, yada. And then I started like realizing that things like that weren't even real, that like our experiences form and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, either I'm going to go crazy by continuing on with these values and just go absolutely nuts and bonkers, or I've got to reevaluate what I find valuable and how I'm going to approach life. And that was where that logic, which was helping me see all these things, kind of took that fundamental place.
Yeah. I find free will a little bit ironic for myself because I genuinely spend the majority of my time trying to have as least amount of free will as possible. I don't want this random action aspect of myself to manifest, even if it is real. I want
predictability. Give me predictability any day.
Exactly. It's something that I think is more innate, and I think that our want and need to control, because we have this self and this agency that is needed to have as much control as possible. We've kind of created this delusion of something that allows us to kind of become gods of our own worlds, if you will, and to have complete reign over everything and over all of our dominion. And in reality, we're still an aspect of nature. We're still a part of the propagation process that the universe started. I mean, I think now like it's not 13.5, it's like 100 billion years ago. The universal process of propagation has happened for a very long time. And due to these asymmetries that happened in the shift of the fundamental forces, we're able to do that. If there wasn't that beginning, then there would be nothing in and of itself. There would just be photons, practically. And the fact that this process happened, that has led to this point that every single past experience leads to a determined outcome is completely fine. Yeah. You should actually be happy about that.
Like we were saying on one of our other podcasts, it's as if you are riding down a river on a raft with no oar, and you're just being taken along with the current. Like, it's like, you're going to go where you're going to go, but you can enjoy the ride and the scenery like along the way.
And, I think that enjoying the scenery is one of the incredible aspects of human consciousness and awareness, is that it's past the point of utility. It's meant for the purpose of beauty and art and appreciation and positive experience. And that being the determined will of the propagation of the universe is incredible. And I do think we do have a choice when it comes to doing that. And that choice can lead to a rich and meaningful experience. But the overall direction will always be determined. Which I think is all right.
I think that we have a choice in the form of there are multiple options for the paths in which we can take. However, the choice that we are going to make is not a choice at all. It is always determined, and we are always going to make the choices that we're going to make, because that's how our networks were built, and that's the circumstances we're put in, and it's one of those abstract concepts that people don't like thinking about, that, or coming to terms with. It's difficult for people to come to terms with sometimes, the fact that they don't actually have a choice in the way that they think they do. It comes down to a fundamental problem with how we choose to look at the word choice. If you look at the word choice as a list of options and of various probabilities, a list of available things you can do, yes, you have choices. However, you cannot be anything except who you are, meaning you are always going to make the choice you're going to make.
Exactly.
Which seems circular, but it is, a fundamental kind of component is like, why would you do anything except what you thought was best, given your values,
Exactly.
And so even if you chose to do something random just to try and like throw off like the
it doesn't work.
It doesn't work, because that choice that you made because of your previous experiences, and probably the fact that you don't like being controlled,
And if there is maybe a reason to believe that the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics is truly the best way of contextualizing kind of the more fundamental realities of probability distributions, then that's great. But even so, each universe that the decisions are manifested in are still completely determined. Which I think is really interesting.
See, and this is one of the reasons I have a problem with that theory. People look at that as if there are options as to how things can turn out.
Yeah.
And the only way I see a multiverse working is if there are branches that all branch out from the beginning of time. Like from the beginning of if things were set up with different variables in each multiverse, like a slight modifications and changes, and you had these like different branches that started out at the same point and kind of branched out, and that was it. That I could see being a case in which a multiverse could work. Yeah. But as far as our individual choices making branches that they come off into this infinite kind of branch tree-like structure, I don't see that as even being possible, because we're still set up with the same fundamental variables.
Yeah.
At every given point in time, we're still set up with the same variables, which are going to result in the same outcomes.
Yeah, sure. That's actually funny that you mentioned that. One of my crazy theological theories was that the asymmetry at the beginning of the shift of the harmony of the fundamental forces was actually the first sin committed by Lucifer, and that through these actionable variables that were created by this sin were what formed humanity. And then through that, the purpose of our existence was actually to reconform those variables into one singular outcome and fully vitalize harmony again.
Dang, you weren't kidding. You were abstract as a kid.
I know. And when my parents were hearing this, they're like, that is incredibly interesting. You should, look more into that, because they were actually very supportive of it. And they're like, that's very smart, the way you like to integrate science with faith.
That's interesting how the feedback from parents kind of can shape your methodologies. Like one of the things I got a lot of positive feedback from my parents was how good I was at building Legos. And to me, that was like a really fun, logical task.
Now you're a machine learning engineer
to focus on. I could just put things like create this vision, that I had in my head and find the components that made it happen. And that's essentially what I do now.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, wait, what were we discussing? Free will, right? Yes.
You're talking about how you as a kid was abstract concept about like the devil and whatnot.
And
we gotta finish up here soon.
Yeah, so but it's just such an interesting conversation.
I know.
And I think you're on something. I don't actually. I think actually the many worlds interpretation is misinterpreted by a lot of people because the actual multidimensional aspect where all these probabilities actualize is mathematically in between an illusion and a real dimension. There's kind of this fuzzy kind of gray area.
I don't know. I think that's the correct way of viewing many worlds were it going to be a thing, but that is not the way that is that concept is used, viewed, or defined. Like most people, even scientists, use it in the way of actually being parallel dimensions. Where things are actualized and not just in a state of this probability state,
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of it has to do with like the symmetries in black holes that could lead to parallel worlds, and through these convergences of large amounts of mass, there's kind of this like subspace that kind of gets realized as an alternate dimension that can't interact with unless you're at the singularity of the black hole.
I think we've found a potential explanation for certain anomalies that we see that we like, and we have latched onto it. I don't think that's a lot of those things are realistic explanations of those phenomenon. I think there's a lot of other options out there as far as what they could.
And I think that's kind of where I'm thinking at, and why I kind of lead more towards like a quantum Bayesianistic.
Oh God, I wish we had more time. I want to hear more about that because those are topics I've never heard referred to together. But
I know it's funny how there's this Bayesian probability theory that is applied to quantum mechanics and that is interprets it in a very interesting way that I think kind of correlates with kind of like some new evidence that's coming out that space-time isn't fundamental, and then the interactions between classical quantum mechanics.
You know what I could do? God. All right, I want to leave us with this note that I was writing to myself the other day on something I was thinking about space-time. And hopefully we can avoid talking about it.
I'm not going to go over a little bit.
Maybe mull it over and talk about it tomorrow after our topics are done, But let me see if I can find it here. It's super fascinating. I was thinking about the intersection of space, time, and gravity, and how those interact with each other. and why. And obviously this is coming from a novice, relatively uninformed opinion, or like uninformed perspective, since I am not a physicist or a astronomer or anything like that. But it was something that I found interesting that I was thinking about, because that's always fascinated me. The fact that we know so little about what really is time and its intersection with space, and why is it there, and what is gravity and its intersection with space, and why is it there, and because they have very visceral effects that we can see, and
we can even sense. We can actually perceptually
right.
feel.
Let me see if I can find this. Where did it go? There we go. Okay. So, see if I can full screen this. Hopefully this thing cause an issue. This is what I wrote down. And this is just raw thoughts as I was thinking them. So it may or may not be well refined or well thought out. But this is what I wrote. I said, is it possible that time is not a dimension, but is simply a byproduct or effect of mass moving through space, a history, so to speak, of particle interactions? It would then seem natural for gravity to have an effect on time, since gravity has an effect on mass within space. Gravity is the effect of a mass interacting with / displacing its surrounding space. And time is the effect of mass moving while interacting with / displacing space. You could then hypothesize that time is simply the gravity, and in quotations, intensity here is where I'm using the word gravity, but is simply the gravity of the recorded changes in interactions between a mass and its surrounding space, and that the two, gravity and time, hold an inverse relationship. One, gravity is viewed through a lens that observes matter's effect on space, and the other, time, is viewed through a lens that observes the effect of matter moving through space. An object with high mass will have an exponentially increased interaction changes between space and any other mass influenced by it when compared to a particle, such as a photon, which would have very few interactions being recorded as it moves through space, allowing for much higher movement speeds.
Yeah.
This would suggest that time is almost the universe's equivalent of drag, essentially a inbuilt resistance to movement of matter through space. In fact, the mere fact that variable time exists and has the interactions with mass and gravity that it does would almost suggest some sort of inbuilt frame rate or rendering speed limit to the universe, the limit of which we can presumably be observed through the speed of light.
Interesting. It's you could almost view time as information just like any other fundamental force in nature, to where you don't have it as this overarching.
It's not a dimension.
Abstract space.
It's an effect.
It's an actual physical property.
Mm-hmm.
And that
it's what happens when things interact with each other.
Mhm.
And so for instance, if we imagine ourselves in this still universe, nothing, just one thing in a field of nothing for it to interact with. Completely isolated. What is time? It's nothing.
Yeah.
Because nothing happens.
Mhm.
And that we can see that reflected in the mass of objects. Things that have a very small mass and very few interactions to be recorded with travel much faster and have the capability of traveling much faster than things with high mass.
Yeah.
That also, we see that effect reflected in gravity too. Things with small mass have very little gravity, which would almost seem that gravity is an indicator of the amount of interactions that are going on with other things around it in time.
Mm-hmm. The lifespan of a photon to a photon
is instantaneous.
Because there's no
i.e. one interaction.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the generation of the photon and the receival, where it's received.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, I think this actually might be an interesting topic to talk about as well, is how they've recently created a super solid state of light where they froze photons in the air and created the super solid of both liquid and matte and a solid in one. It's very interesting. But pretty much when you stop light, it interacts with the physical world unlike anything else there is. And I think that is a testament to when you bring it to the time as something as consolidated as like a macroscopic system, you give rise to actually let me try to explain this correctly. You give rise to a new form of light interacting with other forces that then start to simulate all of them fundamentally, or a lot of them that it's interacting with. And I need to explore this a little deeper before I actually talk about this subject, but I think there might be some correlations to how frozen time might actually, if under certain conditions, might actually turn into almost a symmetry with time itself as the physical substrate. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. People hearing that probably like, huh? But I think that doing the mathematics of that might actually give something that's a little different than even trying to quantize gravity. Is actually integrating mathematics with light interactions and time.
But also imagine that for a second, that we see that that with black holes, right? You have have huge, like high gravities as a result of the density of the black hole itself. So much so that light can't escape it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And with gravity comes a bending of time and the slowing of time through that space because of the density, right? And the amount of interactions, that are happening. So we can imagine that as you get further into a black hole, what would happen in the context of that kind of theoretical model of, or like thought experiment of space, is that there would eventually become so many interactions that were happening that either you would hit the like one of the limits and just stop, or it would become so slow that it would be imperceivable, like, to the difference, which is exactly what we observe when we imagine something falling into a black hole.
Exactly.
Like, is that slowing that happens kind of, and if you think about also the kind of stretching that would happen, like as a result of that, and the spaghettification, as they call it, like that all makes sense too, because you're being pulled in so many different directions, and so there's it's almost like black holes are the reversed limit of the speed of light. It's like the opposite of the limit of the speed of light. It's the flip side, the gravity side. Where you have the photon that's able to travel like at the upper limit. You have black hole that represents the lower limit of things going as slowly and being as dense as they possibly can. And their mystery is kind of in the same way is similar to the mystery of imagining what it would be like to ride a photon.
Yeah.
Like to just be there and then be there, like, it's like, that's really hard for us to comprehend.
Yeah, for sure. At least I'm glad that photons aren't conscious, because they would have a really weird experience. That's for sure.
Yeah. Like, time to wake up.
Oh, guess
God damn, you came out of nowhere.
They are conscious, but they're just so fast they don't even realize it. That might be a possibility.
Well, there's just no space for any recorded history between them. It's this and this. That's it. Two states.
Which is interesting, is when you stay in between those two states and you freeze it and you pause the process. What happens when these mediums converge and interact with each other in a new way? It could give rise to something unlike anything we've ever seen. It's almost like there's this hacking of fundamental principles that align themselves based off of, just the logical dynamics with mathematical dynamics in the universe, and then furthering where it has to update its system of how it can interact.
I just had a crazy thought, dude. What if the only reason we can't observe black holes and what's going on in black holes is because of the point at which we sit in time? So, in other words, if we had a different referential processing, if we were able to process things at a different rate, so to speak, like maybe we were on a planet that was so big, it was like, this is ridiculous, but if we're on a planet that was so big, it had a gravity that was close to a black hole, or at a similar speed to a black hole.
Yeah.
I wonder if we would be able to observe more of a black hole, because we were at a different recording speed, so to speak, and more similar to the black holes.
Yeah, I mean, that would definitely give rise to some interesting observations.
Or if the reverse is true, and if you were to, the lighter you get and the less interactions you have, the more you're able to.
I think that latter would be a little more promising for us. I'm hoping that's the case, because that actually might be something that is applicable to observing cosmological principles that have yet to be discovered, especially since we do have that ability to stop very light mass like light now. And if we're able to manipulate that for better readings and better, maybe even in quantum systems, maybe converging that with topological states, I don't know how that will interact, but it might do something interesting. And through that,
I feel like that's the epitome of experimental physics. It might do something interesting.
I know, it's like, what do you think will happen? Something probably
could be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's really experimental physics. There's the theorists who come up with all of these different ways of interacting. The experimenters are like, All right.
Let's see if it does anything.
They observe and they see, and maybe it's different than what the theorists thought, but they had an intuition that something would happen.
Yeah.
And something did, and it gave rise to some very important information that gave rise to principles that now we're able to then utilize to manipulate reality for our benefit. And I think that right there is the way to kind of get to that type 1 civilization, to where we're able to have that stoppage of kind of these constants like the speed of light and fully negate it to then use that to observe more complex phenomena that wasn't able to in the past.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's something I'm actually really looking forward to in the future. And I hope that we don't get stuck on idealizing string theory.
Yeah.
You know, that we might have to overcome. And I will be always against, I'm not against string theory fundamentally. It's a theory, just like any other one, but I put as much weight on it as any other. In fact, that's given actually no results in the past 50 years outside of its own internal dynamics. I think what it can do with itself. There's nothing else that's been helpful about it.
Right.
So if you're
it feels very much like a sunken cost kind of fallacy where we're kind of like, we've invested so much into this theory, then we're kind of set on it that let's make it work kind of thing.
I know it's like, I mean, when you look at it, the amount of funding that goes to string theorists versus other different types of interpretations of what underlies different quantum mechanical principles, it's billions of dollars versus like pretty much nothing.
Right. Historically, I think in recent years, probably people are seeing the value more of quantum mechanics and like some of those other.
Mm-hmm. I think so, in different interpretations of it instead of, and you know, I know Eric Weinstein has been very much advocating for the fact that we need to be exploring different theories and not just really focusing on string theory, because what he says is that the science is good, the dogma behind it is not. The sociology of string theory is utterly terrible and is completely unscientific. It's more of a mostly cult-like behavior. There's nothing else out there. There can't be anything else. The only thing that could possibly give anything relevant is string theory. Mm-hmm. They dismiss anything else and call it just words. You know, that's what he says. And I think, that's actually pretty accurate.
It sounds pretty accurate. Yeah. I don't know much about like that culture or whatnot, because it's an external perspective. But I'd say like from what I've seen, it does sound like, that's why I said that, like, it's like they've latched onto this idea. And they're like, we've invested so much, it has to work. Like, it has to be true. Otherwise, all this work is meaningless.
Yeah.
It's like, well, it is meaningless, but let it go before it becomes more like, more sunken.
And honestly, it's just hurting science as a whole at this point.
Right. And that's not to say that like I want to clarify. It's not to say that certain elements that were of it are not valuable.
Oh,
like there
valuable.
are elements of sure that have been like thought through and discovered and whatnot that are valuable from that. So it's not a complete waste of time or sunken cost. It's just like a bad relationship. It's like eventually you might have gotten something good out of it. You might have gotten some emotional maturity, some understanding. You might have developed yourself, as a person, figured out what you like, you don't like, things like that. But ultimately, to continue to invest yourself into it, it's not going anywhere. Let it go before.
Exactly. Like, why are we spending billions of dollars of exploring these abstract, high dimensional, high energy theoretical spaces instead of actually continuing to start from the beginning and slowly progress towards maximizing our understanding of the current mechanics of the world instead of just continuing and adding more things to something that hasn't been proven yet.
Right.
Like, it's good. We've got this rigorous mathematical process. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. Let's keep it. And let's try some other things to have a more complete understanding of how things work now. And so maybe if it is something that we should look at, we'll meet there naturally because it's the order of
right. It will explain the stuff that you were looking at before, like it will, if that is something that is meant to be, if that is something that holds a truth that has gone undiscovered, going at it from a different perspective and trying to find another way to arrive at a conclusion is not going to hurt. Like that is going to, if that is the truth, it will lead you back to it, you know?
Definitely.
All righty.
100%.
Well, let us conclude there because he's got an early morning and we are already way past our time.
Well,
so
we got to get at least 5 hours.
We'll see you guys tomorrow and we'll go over our topics then
Yep.
and probably some more interesting discussions. So
oh yeah,
we'll see you guys then. Thanks for joining us.